KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting music from Cobra Kai, The Penguin, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, Star Wars Skeleton Crew, and more, performed live by All-Star Ensemble of Studio Musicians, July 21st at UC San Diego. Tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Welcome in, San Diego. It's Jade Hindman. On today's show, the colonial relationship between the Philippines and the United States through the lens of nursing. Plus, a documentary tells the story of San Diego's Redondo family, known for the doors they opened in the world of tennis. This is KPBS Midday Edition, connecting our communities through conversation. Now that we've crossed 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it reminds us to also reflect on the U.S.'s colonial relationship with other countries, and that includes the Philippines, which the U.S. occupied until the signing of the Treaty of Manila in 1946. That agreement granted the island nation independence from U.S. rule. Reporters Corey Suzuki and Elaine Alfaro recently looked at the impact that treaty on the Filipino and the Filipino diaspora in their reporting series, The Forgotten 4th of July. But one thing that was also impacted by American colonialism is the Philippines nursing system. I'm joined now by Catherine Siniza Choi, professor of ethnic studies at UC Berkeley and author of the book Empire of Care, Nursing and Migration in Filipino American History. Professor Choi, welcome to Midday Edition.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
So glad to have you on and to have this discussion. First, what fueled your own interest in looking into nursing history here?
Well, my own interest was fueled by personal experience as well as intellectual interest. I'm the daughter of Filipino immigrants born and raised in New York City. And when I was growing up there, the neighborhood I lived in was surrounded by a cluster of hospitals. And so my family and I got to know many Filipino nurses, and they were very visible because of their hospital uniforms. But the way I really got to know them, aside from being professional healthcare workers, was also as neighbors and as family friends. And so I observed at a very early age that Filipino nurses are such an important part of the growing Filipino immigrant, Filipino American community in New York, as well as the broader United States. And I'm a professor of ethnic studies, but my PhD is in history from UCLA. And as I entered college and did my PhD work, I became very interested in U.S. immigration history and women's history. And I learned, as you had pointed out, that one of the major contributions of the Philippines is that it is the world's leading sending country of professional nurses to different parts of the world. But historically, the major destination has been the United States. And so this led to my dissertation and then my first book, Empire of Care, as to how and why the Philippines became such an important force in the nursing diaspora.
Where would you start with the story of nursing and migration in the Philippines? You argue that it's not a recent phenomenon.
Correct. We might think of it as a more recent phenomenon, but it's not. And I would start with the history of U.S. colonialism in the Philippines beginning in 1898. And soon after that colonial regime settled, there was the creation of Americanized training hospitals that trained Filipino nurses and even more specifically, young Filipino women to become nurses, but through the education of an Americanized nursing curriculum that also included the study of the English language, both formal English language as well as colloquial. And so to give you an example of this impact of Americanized nursing education in the Philippines in the early 20th century, in order to become a licensed Philippine nurse, you had to pass your licensure examination, which included a section on the colloquial English language. And what this did in the early 20th century, even though at that point in time it wasn't the intent of the United States to necessarily recruit many Filipino nurses to work here, as it did in the second half of the 20th century. But one of the things that that colonial education and history did was it laid the preconditions for the mass migrations of Filipino nurses to the United States and to states like California and Southern California, and even more specifically, San Diego.
And so, this Americanized education system was born out of this idea of benevolent assimilation. Can you talk more about that?
Yes. Benevolent assimilation was an actual proclamation by then US President William McKinley, and then a policy. And the idea was that the United States was coming to the Philippines as friends, as opposed to a being the more traditional kind of colonizing force, and hence the benevolent aspect. And this proclamation and policy came out of how controversial it was during that time period for the United States to colonize the Philippines, and Filipinos who were fighting for their own independence from many centuries of Spanish colonialism. And so it was a very controversial idea of imposing U.S. Sovereignty over another people that wanted their independence. And so the idea that this was a benevolent kind of colonialism, and that the justification was that Filipinos were not prepared for self-government, and that Americanized education could help them do that.
Talk about the harm behind that for a bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there's definitely harm in the sense that this is a racial, and as we would see with nursing, also a gendered kind of hierarchy that places the United States as a civilized nation as a superior one, and hence its justification by claiming that Filipinos were unprepared for self-government. And this is coming during a time when there were Filipinos who were receiving higher education, who were learning about Catholicism. Many Filipinos were adopting Catholicism, so a kind of Christianity. And so the idea that the United States would impose their sovereignty on an educated people who were advocating for their autonomy certainly created harm in terms of their claims for independence, and fueled a kind of racial unequal hierarchy between the United States and the Philippines.
And so, in many ways, this was a false promise.
Yes, it was a false promise, but it happened. It's part of the history. And out of it, inadvertently emerged this incredible Filipino nurse diaspora that has since contributed a great deal to many countries around the world, including the United States.
And how were Filipino nurses treated upon migrating to the United States? Because you paint a complicated picture in the book.
Yes, in the book Empire of Care, I showed that over time, the reception of Filipino nurses in the US has definitely changed over time. And there were moments historically when Filipino immigrant nurses were accepted in the United States, especially in the 1960s and early 1970s. These are like among the pioneering generations of Filipino immigrant nurses to the United States, who were coming and alleviating critical nursing shortages, especially in public hospitals, especially in inner cities in the United States, as well as rural areas that were really dealing with post-World War II nursing shortages. And so at that point, they were welcome. But then as they started to come in larger numbers, some of that legacy of U.S. colonial racism would also figure into their reception. And so sometimes they would be criticized as being inferior nurses who were not as well prepared as U.S. Domestic trained nurses.
What were the other challenges these nurses faced in coming to the U.S., both in the workplace and in their own personal lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's so important to remember that they were dealing with a range of challenges. I mean, some of them were what we might consider mundane, everyday challenges of being immigrants in terms of loneliness, especially those pioneering generations of being really the first to come to a particular city or a particular rural area and not have their close family and friends with them, and yet contribute so much to our American healthcare system. So loneliness, not having the accessibility of Filipino food, which was comforting and familiar to them. Although, of course, that has been changing today in the United States. But those kinds of challenges, as well as more serious challenges, issues of sometimes fraudulent hospital and healthcare recruitment practices, issues of labor exploitation, such as being assigned the most difficult work and the most undesirable work shifts, were among the range of challenges that they faced. And yet, even with those encountering those kinds of challenges, they persisted. And they've been such an important part of the Filipino American community and such an important part of our U.S. healthcare system.
You mentioned the impact that Filipino nurses have had on the nursing diaspora today. In fact, they've done a lot of organizing for issues affecting all healthcare workers. Talk more about that and how they've raised visibility today.
Thanks so much for that question, because it's so important today to consider the struggles, but also the contributions of Filipino American nurses to the United States. And one of those contributions has been to organize themselves in various different kinds of organizations. But one of the most prominent organizations and one of the most historically important has been the Philippine Nurses Association of America, or the PNAA. And that was a national organization that was formed in the 1970s when local chapters of the Philippine Nurses Association throughout the United States. I mean, there was a Philippine Nurses Association in the Philippines, and then individual overseas PNA chapters in places like New York and Chicago, but also in Southern California, including San Diego. And then they decided that there were issues that involved them and the nursing profession, issues regarding licensure, issues regarding the treatment of all foreign educated nurses, not solely Filipino immigrant nurses, and also issues more recently regarding the nursing profession as a whole, including the important role that nurses have played in taking care of all of us during the recent COVID pandemic, and making those contributions of all nurses visible, and their contributions to healthcare as a whole, and how important they are as first responders.
What are your thoughts on America's 250th anniversary and how this folds into the conversation? How are you thinking about it?
Oh, that's such a great question because here we are at the 250th anniversary of something like the Declaration of Independence. And it gives us a time to really reflect and take an intentional pause on what does it mean to be an American. And what is American history? And for me personally and professionally, it means that American history is not solely about one person or one group of people, but belongs to all of us. That we need to reflect upon the diversity of our nation. And part of this diversity is its immigrant diversity and how immigrants, like Filipino immigrants, have made such an important mark on our US history, especially in terms of the healthcare field. And in many ways, they are very much unsung heroes of US healthcare. And I'm so pleased to be given this opportunity to shed a spotlight on them.
Wow. Well, I have been speaking with Professor Catherine Sinisa Choi, Professor of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley and author of the book Empire of Care. To check out other KPBS coverage on the Filipino community in San Diego and beyond, you can find the reporting series The Forgotten 4th of July on our website at kpbs.org. Professor Choi, thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you.
Up next, a documentary tells the story of San Diego's Redondo family, known for the doors they opened in the world of tennis. KPBS Midday Edition returns after the break.
KPBS On Demand is supported by the National Conflict Resolution Center, geopolitics, polarization, budget concerns, all topics that can cause tension in the workplace. NCRC can help seasoned and emerging leaders navigate polarizing issues with the Culture, Communication, and Conflict Certificate. More at ncrconline.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to KPBS Midday Edition. I'm Jade Hindman. An iconic Filipino tennis family is the subject of a new documentary. It's called Love All, and it's premiering on KPBS tonight. It follows the Redondo family and their rise in the tennis world from national city to the world stage. Here's a clip from the film talking about the matriarch of the family, Mamita.
It was my grandmother. She was the one for sure that got us started playing tennis.
You know, you want to be accepted in this country. That's all she wanted. It's not love that you want. You want to be accepted as a person, and she wasn't. So she had a strong desire to make it through tennis.
That was a snippet from the documentary Love All. I'm here now with Sara Persson, the director of Love All, and Ryan Redondo, CEO of Youth Tennis and Barnes Tennis Center. He's actually also featured in the film. Ryan, Sara, welcome to Midday Edition.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
So glad to have you both on here, and congratulations on the film. Sara, how did you first come across the Redondo family story?
It's funny how these stories come about. I actually didn't know about them until a friend of ours walked into our kitchen and said, "Have you heard about this family? They're absolutely remarkable, but they're also kind of this secret tennis royalty that everybody knows, but nobody quite knows their story." And of course, I was intrigued.
So, well, all of that sounds intriguing. Ryan, you grew up in this legacy of tennis. What was your initial relationship to the sport?
Well, I like to say I was born into the sport. Having
Yeah.
my father was the oldest of nine, and And as people will see in the documentary, my aunts and uncles and my father just, created this foundation. And when I was born, my father was the head coach at San Diego State. So I really mean it. I was in diapers on a tennis court.
And Sarah, you mentioned this might be more of a secret, though. How would you define the family's legacy?
I think it's this remarkable story. Their legacy is sort of their legacy, but it's also this city's legacy. They have changed everyone around them by through their grand. It started really with their grandmother, who decided that tennis was going to be the way, and the way to do that with what she could do at the time, which in monetary terms wasn't a lot. She made herself a part of the community by watching everybody's kids, by always being around. And at the time, Morley Field was this melting pot of remarkable tennis players, but also of community. And the family grew up in this environment. And I think because of their Filipino background and also what was given to them, they had this strong desire to give back. And their legacy, other than trophies and world tournaments, I think is this desire to put other people on the bridge.
And as we mentioned, the film starts with Mamita, and so does that legacy. Mamita is the grandmother and matriarch of the family. What else can you tell us about who Mamita was and her legacy? Ryan, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, well, she was my great grandmother. And so if I can speak, I would speak through my grandparents and who they were through her and my father and my aunts and uncles. And I think Sara put it really well as it was about service. There was a service to something greater than, again, just winning trophies and titles and whatnot. And I think that was a belonging. I think it was a level of service to others to show what you could become. And it was a level of excellence that, there was a self-determination that she instilled on the whole family to succeed. And that, again, it wasn't this exterior, look at us, look at all the trophies. It was something internal by far.
Well, Ryan, I mean, in the film, we see you at 6 years old, volleying against a pro. It even
Yeah.
got you a Nike sponsorship at the time. What does that moment mean to you now, looking back at it all these years later?
Gosh, it's remarkable. It's amazing to think back, and I'm here at Barnes right now, and just down the street at the sports arena when I was doing that at 6 years old. It really just shows the legacy of my family, and how deep rooted they were in the sport. But it also just it to me it provides this opportunity that it started with my great grandmother and passed down that I had, and I had that stage and that opportunity to be on that stadium court, if you will, in front of 6,000 people to play. And now, fast forwarding, that's essentially exactly what I'm doing again, and that's what I'm doing for others. And I think that's the legacy through my great grandmother that I just see is kind of naturally unfolding with what I do is provide that center court for everybody.
And you've been a player and a coach, you've done it all. How do you feel about the tennis landscape today and your family's place in it?
Yeah, it's interesting. You have Wimbledon going on, and you see this great player like Iala playing. She just beat the defending champion. Unfortunately, she went down yesterday. But the landscape of tennis is extremely international now. And when you think back in the '70s, when it wasn't so international, and I think back on my Aunt Mita or my Uncle Walter, being able to play at Wimbledon as a Filipino and American minority, it's amazing. And so to see how far the sport has come is awesome. But the real story still hits home that the talent is there. The talent is still equal amongst all of San Diegans, but the opportunity is not. And I think that for tennis, we still have to open up some doors and as Sara said, put people on the bridge to have the opportunity to show what they're becoming.
And Sarah, like in the film, we see the significance of places and public courts like Morley Field and really cultivating this talent. I mean, can you talk more about San Diego as a hub for tennis and how that shows up in the film?
I wish I had been there. The period where the film starts is the 1970s, and it was this really unique melting pot of talent, but also of players from all walks of life playing on public courts. Usually, tennis can happen a lot between, in private clubs, and like we talked about before, access wasn't readily available. But now this was a place where talent mattered more than where you played. So everybody was just coming to Morley Field and helping each other, and there was this set of matriarchs and patriarchs who invested in people who really wanted to do well. So there was a support system from all walks of San Diego, and I think that was a really beautiful thing because in the term "a rising tide lifts all boats," that was something that was happening back then. I think it still happens, but it's such a magical and clear example.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but tennis is an expensive sport, and it takes a village to make the dream happen. And there's a scene where the family talks about Mamita selling cans and newspapers to make ends meet. How else do we see this idea of community come up in the film?
I mean, there are many ways. It actually so the the siblings, their aunt, there was the grandmother, but there was also the aunt, and she was their informal agent, I guess. So it was her job to get them to tournaments. So we have collected all of the correspondence between her and the families in San Diego offering to help. I mean, there were the Belinskis, they came with clothes. There were checks from the Kellogg family when they saw their rise, access to clubs when they needed that, ability to get transport. And there's even this wonderful, wonderful letter where their aunt writes to the Kellogg family, or Kellogg Senior, I guess, and says, "How might I apply to a tournament like Wimbledon?" And there's this wonderful innocence in that. And San Diego takes off, and the Kellogg family begins this correspondence between New York and San Diego to get Marita Redondo to Wimbledon, and she does.
Brian, I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I would agree with Sara. There was that village, takes the village and the infrastructure to be able to launch people out, and that's what San Diego did, and that's what is the beautiful thing about San Diego now. San Diego tennis is maybe one of the strongest communities in the country in that respect, and it's because of the people and the partnerships, and so I think Sara said it perfectly.
And you've actually played a really pivotal role here in helping build up the next tennis generation through Barnes. So, what more can be done to support local talent, you think?
Wow, there's so much that can be done, and but it comes down to access. The local talent we have. Like I said, talent is everywhere, but the opportunities are not, and that's what we're providing. And we're providing opportunities for everybody, not just under-resourced, but you need to provide, say, for the next Wimbledon champion, that individual needs to be able to have experiences in professional tournaments and high-level junior tournaments and whatnot. So we're trying to provide those opportunities right here in our local backyard, rather than having to spend the thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to travel to get there. And then when you think about just the basic level of learning a sport or a game or an art or music, you have to have the opportunities. And so that's what we're also building through all of our partnerships, through the schools and parks that we provide our programming at. But really, it just comes down to access at every single level. How can we provide more access for youth?
And Sarah, in your eyes, how does the Redondo family's story represent the American dream?
It is a story about this family, but I think it's also the story of aspiration, and that is very American. And it's this story. I mean, lots of tennis players have made the same journey to get somewhere, and I think Mamita, she came to this country. That was a gamble, and then she decided to gamble again. But I think she was also a little bit of a visionary, and she saw a path there, much like we've seen the movie King Richard with the father of Venus and Serena Williams, and he understood what those sisters were about. And I think in my research and in my interviews with people, I've come to understand that Mamita was a visionary. I don't think we would be here today if she hadn't been.
Right. Well, Ryan, your family was one of the first to really break the ceiling and bring Filipino American visibility to the tennis world stage. You mentioned seeing more of that with players like Alex Ayala, and who just had a great run at Wimbledon. I mean, what does it mean to see visibility on that level, and how is that changing?
It's wonderful to see that visibility. I know that there are studies like socioeconomic studies, psychology studies on the metrics of having people see people that look like themselves and how that helps them succeed. And so to see her on that stage on center court be able to do that, just it provides that aspiration for all people, and plug in Filipino, plug in Hispanic, whatever you want to call it. So it's awesome to see that. And I believe, not just in the sport itself and playing, but in any leadership role, just continuing to bring awareness. There's I'm actually on this board. I'm going to plug them. The Asian American Pacific Islander Tennis Association, the leaders within the AAPI community being elevated and exposed only helps build the community, and it helps bring awareness to them as well.
The film has had a few screenings now. What's really struck you about how the movie's been received? I mean, what's the response been like?
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Sara.
I mean, for me, the most beautiful moment, I think, was one of the last screenings that we had, where the community took ownership of the film, which is what I always wanted to happen. They looked at it and said, this is our community, this is our people, and I sort of walked away with this happy feeling that we had been able to give this to them to share and inspire, hopefully to tell many more stories. But that's been wonderful. Just the community taking pride and joy in having this story told and recorded, because a lot of the time now they're also talking about Alex Ayala being the first Filipino Filipina player to reach Wimbledon, which so it's a little bit of a missing part of historical records as well.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, well, number one, how grateful and lucky the whole family feels to have this documented and have a story about the family is amazing. So we have a lot of gratefulness to Sara and her team. But I found that people really relate to it. They relate to the competitiveness that I think you can see in all of the redondos. I think they relate to the joy that they get, and I think that's been something very common, that people see the family as very joyful. But I think the story has shown the struggles. They have shown the things behind the scene that are normal, and I think that that's really important, and it ties everybody in together. So I think the connectivity has been really powerful.
I've been speaking with Sara Persson, director of Love All, and Ryan Redondo, CEO of Youth Tennis and Barnes Tennis Center, and is featured in the film. Love All premieres tonight on KPBS at 9 p.m. But if you miss it, don't worry. You can also stream it on the KPBS Plus app, and we'll include more info on our show notes. Sara, Ryan, thanks so much, and congrats on the film.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's our show for today. I'm your host, Jade Hindman. Thanks for tuning in to Midday Edition. Be sure to have a great day on purpose, everyone.
KPBS On Demand is supported by La Jolla Playhouse, presenting The Family Album, a new musical featuring original power pop songs. Mia, a young musician on the verge of success, returns to the home she once left behind. Performances begin July 17th. Tickets at lajollaplayhouse.org.